Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for our special global edition of One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. It's been 3 months since ILTV launched this weekly program, giving you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. Over the past 3 months, we've had the honor of hosting top public figures, along with a diverse crowd of viewers from all over the world who want to get personal with Professor Dershowitz. So today we have a special cross-continental overview of the show's best moments. Let's begin with Irwin Cotler, Canada's former Minister of Justice and Attorney General. Just like Professor Dershowitz, he's a zealous advocate for Israel. Let's hear what they had to say to one another.
I want to commend you on the inauguration of this one-on-one show. I don't know of any lawyer, any human rights lawyer anywhere in the world better qualified and better informed in order to address the issues on this show. Let me put one to you, and that is the issue of delegitimization. It's almost become a conference industry, but I want to suggest that delegitimization per se is not the problem. It has always been with the State of Israel since its creation, when it was referred to as an original sin. The real issue is the laundering or masking of delegitimization under universal public values, the attempt to portray Israel as the enemy of all that is good and the repository of all that is evil, and to launder that delegitimization under the protective cover of the UN, under the authority of international law, where Israel, for example, is the only state in the world that is brought before the contracting parties to the Geneva Convention on the Law of Armed Conflict. Delegitimization under the culture of human rights, where there is a specific agenda item reserved only for Israel at the UN Human Rights Council, kind of Alice in Wonderland situation where the conviction and sentence are pronounced even before the hearing begins. And perhaps the most important, the laundering of delegitimization under the struggle against racism, specifically referring to Israel as an apartheid, if not Nazi state. And so the question becomes, how do we combat this delegitimization, combat this attempt to portray Israel as the enemy of all that is good and the repository of all that is evil?
Well, Irwin Cotler is one of the great human beings, human rights lawyers. It was my great honor and pleasure to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. I hope someday he will get it. I rarely disagree with Irwin, but I must disagree with him here when he says no one is more qualified than me to make these arguments. Irwin is more qualified than I am. He is the most qualified person to make international law arguments, as evident by his brilliant question. Let me try to respond to it. I think one of the greatest tragedies that has occurred in the last 20 years has been the hijacking of the human rights agenda, turning human rights into human wrongs, using human rights not as a shield to protect vulnerable people, but as a sword directed only against Israel. And the real victims of this have been the victims of genocide around the world, because they don't get the attention they ought to get, because the attention of the international community is focused almost exclusively on Israel. We do have apartheid around the world today. We have it in Saudi Arabia, where there is gender apartheid and religious apartheid. We have it in other places, and yet the word is reserved now for Israel, which is one of the most diverse and heterogeneous countries, not only in the world, but in the history of the world. You have people of every shades of color, every shades of ethnic background, different kinds of religions living together, often in harmony, in more harmony than in many other countries of the world, and yet the word apartheid is thrown around. It is such an insult to the real victims of apartheid. Irwin and I fought together on behalf of Nelson Mandela and against apartheid in South Africa. Mandela and others would be turning over in their graves if they heard the word apartheid used by people like Bishop Tutu to falsely describe Israel today, or people like Jimmy Carter to falsely describe. So that's the great tragedy, is that the human rights that were developed really after the Second World War through people like Eleanor Roosevelt and others are now being used as a form of discrimination against the nation state of the Jewish people. We have to fight it. We have to fight it at every turn. Irwin is fighting it. I'm fighting it. We have to fight it in international fora. We can never, ever allow these charges to remain unrebutted. You get the very people who are today throwing gay people off roofs, who are discriminating against women, who are discriminating and murdering and raping Christians, claiming that they are the standard bearers of human rights. Human Rights Commission, chaired by some of the worst human rights offenders. We must turn that around, and Irwin is on the forefront of turning that around. And I will never stop as a person who's devoted to human rights, devoted all my life to human rights. I will never stop in protesting how the human rights agenda is being turned on its head and how it's being used not only to attack a country that has a good human rights record, but also to protect countries.
Now, let's turn to a question from Europe. Alison Demerjian is from Germany, and she had a question about the legal aspect of the U.S. elections. Let's hear her out.
Hi, my name is Alison Demerjian, and my question is, based on the recent email scandal surrounding Hillary Clinton, many Americans are angry, and they feel like the rule of law no longer holds true in the United States, that it's subjective, and it's largely based on who you are, who you know, and who stands to be hurt if the law is actually applied to you. Do you believe that this is the case, Professor Dershowitz, or is there a rule of law in the United States that holds true no matter who you are? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. There really is a big difference between how the law is applied today in Germany and how it's applied in the United States. In Germany, there's virtually no discretion that prosecutors have. If a crime has been committed, they essentially must prosecute. In the United States, we have very, very broad criminal laws, and prosecutors pick and choose based on criteria who they're going to prosecute and who they're not going to prosecute. In the case involving Hillary Clinton, the director of the FBI, who is a very experienced and very well-regarded FBI director, looked at all the facts and came to the conclusion that no one who had been accused of doing what Hillary Clinton was accused of doing has ever, ever, ever in the history of the United States been criminally prosecuted for that kind of matter. Previous secretaries of state and other high officials have used personal emails and iPhones, etc. So he made the decision that although she, in his words, was extremely careless, she did not cross the line into criminality. In my own experience, if I were a prosecutor, I would always ask the Hamlet question. That is, did the person say to be or not to be a felon? Did the person cross over the line deliberately from innocent conduct into felonious conduct? And of course, in this case, I don't think there's any doubt that Hillary Clinton did not do that. And so, look, every voter in America has the right to judge her on what she did or didn't do. But I think the FBI had made the right decision in recommending against prosecution. This is a very strange election in the United States. I've just written a new book about it called Electile Dysfunction, a guide for unaroused voters, because I recognize that many Americans, I'm not among them, but many Americans have a difficult time choosing between these two candidates. There are negatives of very, very high, both of them in the polls. And whoever gets elected may very well get elected not because he or she is the most popular candidate, but because he or she is running against an even less popular candidate. So we have a very strange election, but I think I can assure you that the rule of law was properly applied in the Hillary Clinton case.
Now let's turn all the way to Africa. William Stephen is from Cameroon, and he's one of the young students who participated in our 9/11 Global Terror Special. He had more of a philosophical question for Professor Dershowitz.
Hi, my name is William Stephen. I'm a student in counterterrorism. I come from Cameroon, and we are now in Cameroon fighting against Boko Haram in the north. In this regard, the Cameroon government decided to apply last year a law which allowed the death penalty for everyone who carried a terrorist attack or even are suspected to carry a terrorist attack. My question is, what do you think about regarding this law, also regarding the civil liberties and the human rights?
That's a great question. Certainly it would be immoral and illegal in any country to execute somebody who is, quote, suspected of planning terrorism. Suspicion is not enough. You go back to the Bible, it says, on the basis of 2 witnesses, may you convict somebody of a serious crime. Even if we believe 1 witness is enough, No civilized country, no country under the rule of law would ever convict anybody based on mere suspicion. But let's take a case where a person is clearly a terrorist, where he's been videotaped terrorism, engaged in an act of terrorism, or he's planted a bomb that killed hundreds of people. Is the death penalty immoral? I don't think the death penalty is immoral if, in fact, it can reduce the number of deaths from terrorism. I think that trade-offs are permissible. Even Jeremy Bentham, the great liberal philosopher, talked about the greatest happiness for the greatest number. And if you could show that the death penalty by killing one guilty person prevents the death of 10 innocent people, it would not be immoral. The experience in my country shows, however, that it can't be applied fairly. The death penalty is never applied fairly. It's applied largely to people of color, largely to minorities, largely to people who kill white people, not black people. It almost never gets applied to somebody who has a good lawyer, without being too self-referential. I have never lost a death penalty case. I've never had one of my clients executed, because decent lawyers can stop that from happening. And we shouldn't have a death penalty process that depends not on the seriousness of the crime, but on the color or background of the victim or perpetrator, and on the quality of the lawyer he or she is able to get. So I'm against the death penalty, though I don't think it's immoral if you can demonstrate that by killing one guilty, you can save the lives of 10 innocent.
All right, turning now to the United States, Shai Ginsburg wants to talk about a burning topic right now, police brutality. Let's hear what Professor Dershowitz has to say.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. My name is Shai Ginsburg. With all the recent talk about police brutality, especially in the Black community, what would you say to someone who can't seem to understand both sides of the issue and who's just determined to only, side with members of the force or the victims of the violence?
Shay, what a great question, and it couldn't be more timely. As you probably know, Black Lives Matter, which did a great deal of good in alerting the public to the problem of the excessive use of force by some police officers in some parts of the country, just produced a platform by 60 of its component groups in which they declared Israel to be guilty of genocide and apartheid. So I have totally and completely disassociated myself from Black Lives Matter or any organization associated with Black Lives Matter until and unless it eliminates that despicable blood libel from its platform. Again, as I said previously, just because an organization does good doesn't mean we can justify it doing bad things. And Black Lives Matter has done a terrible thing by accusing Israel of genocide and apartheid. Because when you accuse a country of genocide and apartheid, you're basically saying the country has no right to exist. The last country that was accused of apartheid was white South Africa, and that ceased to exist after Nelson Mandela, who I helped to represent, got out of prison. I know what apartheid really means because I worked on the issue for many, many years. So I think we all have to disassociate ourselves from any organization, including Black Lives Matter, until it rids its platform of this obnoxious and anti-Semitic blood libel. The complex problem of police brutality deserves serious consideration. I've been fighting against it for many, many, many years since the beginning of my career. It's a complicated problem. Not every case is simple. Not every case involves overt police brutality. One has to look at all the evidence in every single case and make individual decisions based on the case. For example, the Trayvon Martin case, which essentially began the Black Lives Matter movement, was extremely complicated. Zimmerman probably should never have followed Trayvon Martin the way he did. On the other hand, when Zimmerman pulled a gun and shot and killed Trayvon Martin, he may very well have been in danger of losing his life. The evidence showed that he had bruises on the back and front of his face, that his head was being smashed against the concrete, and a jury acquitted him, as juries have acquitted in many such cases, like in Baltimore. And so you can't just root for one side or the other. You have to understand that Black lives do matter because all lives matter. Blue lives matter too. When a policeman gets up in the morning and leaves, the only thing he wants to do is stop crime and come back and kiss his wife and children at the end of the day. And many police officers have been killed. Now, To be very counterintuitive, let me assert one fact categorically. The situation has improved dramatically since the time I started practicing law half a century ago. There is far less police discrimination against African Americans. That doesn't mean there isn't any, and it doesn't mean there isn't too much. There is too much, but there's much less of it. Today, police commissioners in cities like New York, Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles are wonderful and do a great job in trying to integrate police forces and make them more responsive to community needs. So let's recognize the good. Let's understand that there's a lot more to go, and let's understand that there are multiple sides to this complex issue. And most important, the importance of due process of law. Every police officer who is accused has to be given a fair trial in front of a jury, and the facts have to determine the outcome of the case. So let's get back to having a balanced approach to this problem. And let's understand that any organization that is fighting discrimination in America by becoming complicit in efforts to delegitimate Israel or to call it apartheid or a genocidal state should lose the support of all decent people around the world.
And now finally back to Israel. Professor Dershowitz is usually asked about law and politics, his recent publications, and even his moral take on ethical issues. But this time around, Ambassador Danny Ayalon, who was also the former Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, asked a more personal question.
Dear Ellen, Mazal Tov, congratulations on your new show on ILTV, a very important show as Israel continues to face BDS and delegitimization campaigns, and you are the best one to answer all the difficult questions and to equip all the listeners with the right answers to defend Israel in the best way. I have one question for you, and that is, if you recall, 5 years ago, I came on behalf of Prime Minister Netanyahu in a very confidential mission to meet you and offer you the job of Israel's envoy to the United Nations, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Unfortunately, you didn't take this offer. And my question to you is, why didn't you take the job?
Well, Danny, thank you so much. You have been one of Israel's greatest spokespersons, your wife as well, in her efforts to get the Christian community to remain supportive of Israel. You've done fantastic work on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. Danny, when you came to see me in Miami Beach, Florida, you presented me with one of the hardest decisions of my life. I would have loved to do nothing more than to stand in the well of the United Nations on behalf of the nation state of the Jewish people. Nothing would have given me more pleasure, more pride. I think I would have done a good job in defending Israel in front of the international community. But my own feeling was that there are so many superb Israelis who could do the job effectively. When I didn't take the job, it was given to Ron Prasar, who did a fantastic job. That all things being equal, I think it'd be far better for an Israeli to represent Israel at the United Nations. I also worried that it might raise the specter in the United States of dual loyalty. I am an American. I was born in Brooklyn of parents who were born in the United States, grandparents who came over from the shtetls of Poland, and I'm a patriotic and loyal America. And if ever there were a situation, and there might be one this very year, where the United States and Israel take diametrically opposing points of view, the United States may not veto the French proposal this year to impose a peace on Israel, which I think would be terrible for peace, terrible for the peace process. As an American, I would be accused of a dual loyalty, and it might hurt the Jewish community in America. I think the situation is different depending on the job. When an American citizen was made the head of the Bank of Israel, that was different. That's a kind of technical job. Or when Elie Wiesel was offered the position of president of Israel, or Albert Einstein, again, the presidency of Israel is a symbolic job that basically is the presidency of the Jewish people around the world. But to represent a country at the UN requires, I think, that you give up your loyalty to one country and adopt it completely to another country. And I was concerned about that. Look, in the end, it turned out very good for everybody, because Ron Prasar did a fantastic job at the United Nations, And I think that Israel was and continues to be well represented in that terrible place where terrorism is rewarded, democracy is punished, and doublespeak is the language of the day. So thank you, Danny, for all your work on behalf of Israel, and thank you for being the one to offer me that job on behalf of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister, and for making my life so difficult by putting me in the position to have to make that terrible choice. But thank you again, Danny.
That's all the time we have for today's global special of One-on-One with Professor Alan Dershowitz. A big thanks to all of our guests from around the world. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.